MDC Wildlife Program Supervisor Lauren Hildreth, and MDC Cervid Biologist Aaron Hildreth. So welcome, Lauren and Aaron.
Everybody.
Hello. Let's get to know them a bit better. So first, same last name, what's the association?
We are married. Met in grad school at a wildlife conference, actually.
Well, wonderful. And thanks. Lauren, tell us a bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so I've been with the department for 3 years now. Previously volunteered with a wildlife refuge, worked as a contract biologist with the Forest Service. I have a bachelor's in wildlife from the University of Georgia, and then a master's of natural resources focusing in outreach, also from the University of Georgia.
Wonderful, thank you. And Aaron, background on you and your job. First, what's a cervid biologist?
So basically just think deer, elk, moose.
Okay, members of the deer family called cervids.
Yep.
All right, thanks. So tell us about your background and your job.
So I've been with MDC for about 3 years. I got my bachelor's degree from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in fisheries and wildlife. And then my master's degree from the University of Kentucky. While I was in Kentucky, I was actually studying the elk that we reintroduced to Missouri in 2012 and 2013.
It was a small world.
Cool thing. I've spent some time working on various disease and damage issues across the country, and then spent some time in Idaho as a biologist there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Aaron. And thank you folks again for joining our webcast. Please share your questions with us through the box, which is on the right side of your screen. We will answer whatever questions we can in the time we have. And please connect again. Have no video or audio. So try to reconnect if you're not hearing us. All right, so today, what are we going to cover? We are going to go over elk restoration in Missouri, elk viewing and elk tourism, elk research, and finally, elk hunting in Missouri for the first time in modern history. That is pretty exciting. So let's get started. Some elk restoration background. Lauren, why don't you give us a bit of history on elk in Missouri and why the Department of Conservation has restored this once native species?
Sure. So see from the map on your screen, historically ranged across North America, so up into Canada, New York, down to Georgia, and that population was shrunk because of unregulated market hunting, and the last elk was taken in Missouri in about the late 1880s. So, and then around the 2000s, MDC started looking at restoring elk in Missouri, and we started releasing elk from Kentucky starting in 2011.
Your project from 2011 to 2013.
Yes.
We'll get into a bit more of that. So, big question, why restore elk to Missouri?
Big reasons why, just kind of the intrinsic value of having elk, returning a native species to Missouri.
It's a big part of what we do.
Right, exactly. And, the ecological benefits, they are a large herbivore, so a lot of the kind of ecological benefits of that, shaping the environment that they're in, also the economic benefits, and then the future recreational opportunities for folks with elk hunting.
Okay, so we brought elk over 3 years from Kentucky to a place in the Ozarks. So let's see kind of where we're talking as far as our elk restoration zone.
Our elk restoration zone is in portions of Carter, Shannon, and Reynolds County. The reason this was selected is it's kind of low human density, large amount of public land, low road density, low row crop agriculture. There's some cattle and things of that nature, but low row crop. And we have a lot of private land partnerships along with those public land areas in that zone. And our goal was to have 400 to 500 animals total. And our plan is to manage that population through hunting. So that's kind of where we brought them.
Right, and so from the start, and the map's kind of busy, but the big thing to pay attention to is the red outline on the larger map. That's the general elk restoration area. And then the different colors show private lands and public lands. So it's a busy map, but the big takeaway is it's down in the Ozarks. Whereabouts in the Ozarks? It covers Carter, Shannon,
And
and
Reynolds
Reynolds County.
So Van Buren, Ellington, Winona, that area.
And Eminence.
And
Those are the
Eminence.
communities around that. Well, good. Thank you for the restoration briefing background.
Of course.
Let's talk about elk viewing and tourism. So we brought elk back. How can people see them?
So from the map, you can see again where they're located. So in the Missouri Ozark, with the tourism piece of this, a lot of the historic Ozark tourism is around summer vacation. So floating, that sort of thing. And so the elk actually provide a great opportunity for fall tourism. So
Right, along with great color changes of fall foliage, elk bugle in the fall, and it really has shown to be extending the tourism opportunities for this area and these local towns. So as we can see, we offer, tell us about this driving tour.
Right, so we have a driving tour, 2 of the conservation areas in the restoration area. So you can see Peck Ranch Conservation Area is in the lower left, and Current River Conservation Area is in the upper right. And you can take that tour. They're open from sunrise to sunset every day. There are some closed times for managed hunts or fall fire season. So check the website, and then there's also a hotline number you can call for those closed times. Whenever you're out there, look at the fields, look in the tree line. The elk could be in a variety of places. The main thing to remember with the driving tour is make sure you stay in your vehicle. Roll your windows down, take some great pictures, but stay in the vehicle, and don't approach or harass wildlife in any way. So just try and be the least impactful to the environment as you can.
We already have a question. So someone wants to know, what's the ultimate kind of goal for the population of elk? I think you mentioned what's the big number that we're looking for and trying to maintain.
So we're trying to maintain 400 to 500 elk.
All right, and another question we get with this, folks think, are we going to be restoring them all throughout Missouri? And we know the answer is no, a bit, why not?
So the rest of Missouri, I mean, it has a lot of different kind of land uses as well. So especially up north has a lot more row crop agriculture. So the impacts of elk in those areas would be a lot greater than they are in the Missouri Ozarks. So that's part of the reason as well.
Right, and as you mentioned, you know, a kind of low number of roads, lower population, big rugged areas. So the rest of the state really can't support a population like that. Now somebody else wants to know, we went to Kentucky to get our core elk population. They're wondering why didn't we choose of the different species? Now we do know that the original elk here were eastern elk, which tend to be larger than the current species by a bit, but those really have gone extinct. So Kentucky, where we got elk, got their elk out west too, I believe.
Correct. So yeah, with the subspecies that we reintroduced is the Rocky Mountain subspecies, and so yeah, why not the Julie or the Roosevelt elk? And the reality is, are probably more similar to the eastern subspecies. For what we have, also the number and availability of Rocky Mountain elk compared to Roosevelt or Julie, it was easier to acquire Rocky Mountain elk from different states. Those populations tend to be far more geographically isolated to the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast.
Good to know. Good to know. Thank you, Aaron, for that. Lauren, we're going to jump back here for a few more minutes on elk viewing and tourism. So we have a driving tour. Key things to remember: stay in your vehicles, call our 1-800 number, or check before you go to make sure the area is not closed.
Correct.
And when you do get there, the driving tour goes through some fields. And folks, as you see a lot of pictures, you'll see elk in green fields. Also, though, they tend to be up in the hills. So kind of keep your eyes peeled.
Correct.
And again, tourism in the area, how's that been received by the local communities and local businesses?
It's been received very well. So we did a study back in 2016, and we determined that the economic benefit of elk to those local communities was actually $1.3 million.
So more than $1 million being brought in
right.
through this effort.
Directly because of the elk. And so we also looked at how many people were utilizing our driving tour. And in 2016, 23,000 people utilized the driving tour. So bringing in more tourism, extending that tourism season. So it wasn't just summer anymore, bringing that in more into the fall as elk are bugling, because the bugling, the rut is right now, so now is a great time to go down and see them. And our elk will bugle late September through about early December.
Okay, good to know. And as we can see from these slides, you know, the community of Ellington is really embracing it through their tourism. As you see our bugling bull in the right top corner, Missouri Division of Tourism is promoting elk tours and tourism in the area. Lake News Online had an article in there talking about elk restoration is bringing praise from business leaders. It's going well.
Yes.
Another question we just got from Blaine, who I think might have just tuned in. He asked, any plans to expand the herd? We've already covered that we want to maximize the number at about 500, maintain that through hunting, and limit the herd geographically in the state where it already is, because the rest of the state really can't support elk. So thanks, Blaine. And thank you, Lauren. Again, now's a great time of year to take a road trip to the Ozarks and see elk.
Correct.
And folks, we remind you, please share and continue to share your questions with us through our chat box. We'll answer what we can in the time we have. Over to Aaron for a bit now for some information on the elk research that MDC staff and others are doing.
Yeah, so really quick before we jump ahead, I can see on the slide that's there, the photo in the upper left corner would be an example of just us working. It's a young yearling male in this picture. The photo on the upper right would be an example of three yearling males that are collared. So we use those collars to track their movements and survival. We've got a collared calf in the lower left corner, another picture of working up a cow, and then we've got a collared cow and a calf in that lower right.
Thank you, great descriptions. Let's talk about the research. And again, we brought these elk in between 2011 and 13. How'd they do?
Yeah, so we reintroduced about 108 elk between 2011 and 2013. That reintroduction process took about 6 months. So we'd catch elk in January, they would be released sometime in June. So many of you will also recall that in 2012 we had a really large drought. It's pretty severe. So we take into account the reintroduction, that drought. Our founding population size really is about 81 individuals. So keep that number in the back of your heads as we move forward. We really have a population of about 80 individuals.
And you mentioned the drought of 2012. Now, the timing of that really beyond our control, but talk about lining things up. We had pregnant cow elk coming in May.
Yeah, they would be transported from to Missouri sometime in that middle of May time frame.
Right, they're heavily pregnant. They tend to calve in June.
So yeah, late May, early June is the peak of calving.
That's right in the middle of a huge drought. Yeah. They're stressed from the transport. They're stressed from calving. So despite all these odds, we didn't do too bad.
Yeah, they're a resilient critter.
All right. We are going to get to that. So someone's asking about black bears and other predators affecting our elk. We're going to cover that here in a few minutes. And somebody has a question about the elk, actually 2 elk that were recently hit by semi-trailers in northwest Missouri. Now, I believe that was Nottoway County. Folks, I could tell you that our agents have collected the carcasses. We're looking at the origins of that. Aaron, do you have more to share?
Yeah, so there was one in Nottoway County and one in Holt County.
Holt County.
We have submitted both of those animals for testing. We're also trying to determine origin using stable isotopes. Basically, we can
What's that mean?
Some cool science using hydrogen in this case and basing it on precipitation of that, so we can get an idea of where the animal came from through that. So we're working on that now, and when we know, we'll publish.
All right, good. But at this point, we really don't know. So again, looking back, our survival rates, kind of tough at first, but they're doing okay. We ended up with 81 elk surviving out of the 108 we brought in. Let's look more survival after release and some early survival rates.
Yeah, so when we look at that survival from 2011 to 2014, so right around the time of reintroduction, we see that for our adults and our yearlings, both male and female, they were doing pretty well. Where we did see lower numbers compared to other eastern elk populations was in our calf survival and our adult reproduction. That wasn't necessarily a cause for concern. It was an area that we wanted to look at more, but as we mentioned earlier, that reintroduction was hard on the animals. It's a stressful time, so we don't necessarily expect calf survival and reproduction to be representative of what we expect in the future once they're established back here in Missouri.
Okay, so that's the early survival rates. Let's move to movement and habitat use, kind of where these elk are, where they're tending to stay, and what habitats they're using.
Yeah, so when we look at, we put those collars on the animals, and that really does help us figure out how they're moving and what habitat they're using. We look at, one of the things we look at is, what we were interested in from the beginning was site fidelity, or how well elks kind of stay where we put them. When we think about elk populations out west, they move large distances in a very short period of time. We don't really want elk moving large distances. So we're looking at how well they stayed, and we look at Peck Ranch, and that's more or less where we released all of them. So how would they stay around Peck Ranch?
All right, and we have another chart seeing about how well they're doing.
Yeah, so we look at, from that collar data, we can see how well they stay within the quote boundary, and then how well they also stay around Peck Ranch. When we look at that larger boundary, with more than 1 million GPS points, we still see that 95+% of our elk locations are within that boundary. When we look more specifically at Peck Ranch, we see a slow decrease in the percentage of locations on Peck. It's also not a cause for concern. That's a sign that we have a growing population. It's also a true testament to our private land owner partners, as well as public land partners like the National Park Service, on some of the habitat work that they're doing, keeping elk in those areas by providing high quality habitat.
Okay, so you were talking about they're mostly staying put. Folks, we have another map here. So Aaron, can you tell us what some of these colored outlines mean?
Yeah, so that blue bigger outline really is just kind of that original restoration zone. When we look closer in the center there, we see that red outline. Those are those first few years during the reintroduction. We expand slightly outward, look at the yellow, that's 2 years later, so 2014 to 2016. Then we look at 2 of the more recent years, 2016 to 2018, in that green boundary. We see that we're starting to get this expansion. Again, that's a sign that as the population's growing, those elk are moving out and using new habitat, but still within kind of the area that we would like to have elk in Missouri.
So they're really staying where we want them. There's the little anomaly down in the corner. That's a unique kind of thing. Just tell us about that.
It is. So if you're looking at that map, you see on the Carter County label, there's this little,
Green kind of dot.
That is basically a representation. We have a group of cows and calves that every year they go down to this area to calve. They spend the summer months, and then around this time of year when we're doing breeding season, they actually come back to Peck Ranch. So it's kind of a cool little. They found a really good chunk of high quality habitat. They're utilizing it and going back and forth.
And again for calving, which happens May, June,
some of it into July.
July, and then again, folks, picture of one of our fields at Peck Ranch with mostly cow, some calves feeding, and then we have an elk cow with her calf who's already collared. The cow's collared down there. All right, so more about research. What are we doing?
So, again, as we've talked about some of the habitat use, we continue to get that data with the collars. We also get adult survival. Those collars help us know if the animal's still living or not. But where we are really wanting to key in on, as I mentioned earlier, we're wanting to get more current information on calf survival and adult reproduction. And so we're really using the research project that's wrapping up to get this information.
And you mentioned reproduction as being a really key area of focus. So let's talk more about the research we're doing with that and explain to all of us what we see in these photos, because this is pretty cool.
It is. We would tend to capture cows between January and March. We want to do that then because that's far enough after breeding season that if the animal is pregnant, we can pick it up. So we get the cows down. We use an ultrasound. That ultrasound lets us see what whether mom is pregnant or not. The image in the upper left corner there is the image of a calf skull inside of mom. So that calf is between 3 and 4 months. It's 3 or 4 months along into that pregnancy. When we determine that mom is pregnant, The lower left image is called a VIT, or a vaginal implant transmitter, and that's basically something that we can put inside mom. Doesn't cause her any harm. When mom gives birth, that transmitter comes out. It sends us a signal, and it helps us after mom and calf have had time to bond. It helps us to then locate the calf, to put a collar on it. That collar grows as the calf grows, and we're able to monitor that calf's survival for the first year of life.
I mean, that's really using science and technology to save a whole lot of time and effort, because these are large areas and cows tend to be real secretive, kind of like any mom, wanting to protect the baby.
They are.
Questions. The ultrasound shows the calf skull at least how many months?
3 to 4 months post-conception.
Okay, so how long is gestation for elk?
So it's between 8 and 9 months long.
Okay, good. And folks also are asking, how many in the herd are being tracked now?
It depends. It depends on the time. We've had more than 100 animals that we're tracking at any one time today. Right now, we're probably sitting in somewhere in the 40.
Okay, and a follow-up, another question we got is, do we capture the cows and place collars on them at all ages? Or do we just put collars on the calves and they grow with the collars?
Elk of all sex and age classes. So we're interested in both male and female calf survival. We're also interested in yearling and adult males, as well as yearling and adult females. So we want to get those sex and age specific survival rates for all age classes of animals.
Okay, very good. So here's kind of what we do with some research on reproduction. What are the results? How are the survival rates showing now?
All in all, pretty good. So when we look the more present data, so we compare back to the original, we compare to other eastern elk populations, our adult and yearling calf survival is pretty well on par with what we would expect to see for other eastern populations. When we look at our adult and our yearling male survival, our values are a little bit lower, and we're trying to figure out some of why that is. When we look at calf survival, out of every 3 calves that are born seem to survive. Some might think that's low. When we look at whitetails, only about 50% of whitetail fawns live. So elk are a little bit hardier. They're a little bit larger. Mom is a very protective mom. So we tend to see a little bit higher survival. When we look at adult reproduction, we've seen those values come up closer to where we would see or expect for other eastern populations. And honestly, I think even what we have with the 75% for other eastern populations is probably low.
Good to know. So we see our current survival rates, and talking about survival and mortality, or cause-specific mortality. So what do you mean by cause-specific mortality? Essentially, it's what's been killing some of the elk.
So it is the specific cause
of their mortality or death.
Correct. And so, when we think of many animals, we tend to think that it's something with sharp, pointy teeth that's doing the killing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that's the case. Oftentimes it's not. So is a photo from that was taken here in Missouri on Peck Ranch, where we do actually have a dead elk and a mountain lion. So we have documented that there are at least 5 elk that have been killed by mountain lions in the state. Ecologically, that's really cool. They're the 2 rarest mammals in the state that have found each other in one spot. So it's ecologically a really cool interaction.
Right, and that's really nature at its best, because you have a natural predator pursuing a natural prey animal, just doing what nature does. So that's a good thing to see, right?
Absolutely.
Sorry, pardon me. We also had a question earlier, someone asking, how will black bears and mountain lions affect our elk? So you talked a little bit about mountain lions we've seen.
So we've had well over 100 calves collared, probably closer to 125, 130. We have yet to document a single calf being killed by a black bear. I'm not saying that it hasn't happened. We haven't been able to document it with a pretty good sample from what we've had so far. We also haven't documented any adult elk being taken by black bears. So they do share a similar range. Black bear range is also within a portion of the elk range.
So again, nature in action, which is great. And you mentioned that when we think what's killing elk, we think big things with tooth and claw. But as it turns out, it's something pretty tiny without any limbs.
Yeah, it's something.
Or any teeth.
It's something that's about as big around as a human hair. So brain worm or meningeal worm is the leading known cause of death for elk in Missouri. It's not a be alarmed by kind of parasite. It's actually very common in Missouri and most eastern and midwestern states.
Tailed deer often get it, and they've developed a good immunity, so it's good here as long as kind of wildlife's been here, right?
Yeah. So when we look at we open up some deer skulls, depending upon the year and the location. Even here in Missouri, we may have 40 to 80% of the whitetails in some spots that have brainworm. They just exist with it just fine. They've kind of evolved together. Elk, not so much. We do see that brainworm causes problems with other eastern elk populations. And again, it's a kind of a novel parasite for the elk. Some of them seem to do better with it than others. I would argue that probably all of our elk here, some show no signs or symptoms, others do end up dying from it.
So looking at these images now, the one on the right is really the adult worm. So you see what the critter looks like. The other one, it's kind of complicated. It's the life cycle. So real briefly, simply, how's this life cycle work?
So basically, a deer or an elk that has that parasite will, when it poops, it'll go out on there. A slug or a snail will, go across that. It'll pick up the parasite. Then as that slug or snail is feeding and hanging out on grass, the elk would accidentally ingest that slug or snail while eating grass. That parasite will go through a couple more stages, ultimately end up back in the brain, and then die or poop back out, and the cycle will continue again with another slug or snail going over.
Right, and again, it's not 100% lethal. Not every animal that gets it dies from it.
It's not, and there are no human health concerns from this parasite.
So no worries as far as when we get to hunting here in a little bit, folks. No worries about brainworm from elk meat. All right, thanks. Great info. Let's jump ahead. So we've been through some struggles and challenges. They're doing great. What's the population latest count?
So as of June of this year, so animals yearly cycle, we say basically June 1st through May 31st. As of June of this year, we're sitting at roughly 175 adult elk. That's before calving season this year. So we estimate we've probably had at least 40 calves hit the ground this year. We're in the middle of doing cow-calf counts now. That'll give us an idea of what reproduction was. So we'll be able to use that information to help update this population total going forward.
Okay, again, great information. Folks, we remind you to please share your questions with us. We have them coming in. We'll answer as many as we can. So, asked, how can you make donations to the department specifically for elk? And
so there, I believe there is an account set up through the Missouri Foundation. Money can be directed to elk research that or elk work in Missouri that way. There are no direct ways that money donated to the department goes directly towards elk. We manage all forest, fish, and wildlife, so it's dispersed.
Right, we don't have little individual dedicated buckets, but again, you mentioned the Missouri Conservation Heritage Foundation is kind of a fundraising philanthropic conservation agency or foundation in Missouri. You can contact them for more information, or you can get a hold of us here at MDC. All right, so we covered that. And then a tough question is folks are asking if there's any concern about chronic wasting disease or CWD getting into our elk population, and what are we doing about that?
So there's certainly always that concern. So right now here in Missouri, we just have CWD in the whitetail population. We are very actively monitoring for CWD within the elk herd. So any elk that dies, we do test that animal to see whether it's been detected or not in it. The closest positive for CWD in the state is Oregon County. So it's not all that far away. With that said, it is a real concern. If or when CWD finds its way to the elk herd in Missouri,
Hopefully it will.
Yes, we certainly hope that it will not, but we will basically use the best available science that we have and tackle it head on as we do here in the state. And we realize that is a very serious threat to our both deer and elk in the state. So I want to make sure that we do our due diligence.
And that kind of ties in why the Department of Conservation is taking really such active efforts in trying to limit disease or CWD throughout the state. Is what we do know, if you catch it early, you can really kind of limit its spread, and that's really what we want to do at this point. Randy wants to know how many tags will be issued. Randy, we're going to be getting to that here next. So we remind our folks again. Before we move on, population. So we got off to a slow start. This quick graph here, it looks like it's growing pretty well now.
Yeah, so we'll notice, I'll remember back, we said that the founding population was around 80 individuals. That was 80 of that 108 that we initially brought in. So we'll see that when we think about that, roughly that 2013, 2014 timeframe, we look forward to now where we're at the 175 or so. The sheer number increase isn't significant, but the population is essentially doubled in that 4 to 5 year time span. Some people will also notice between 2018 and 2019, that line more or less held steady. 2018 was a particularly rough year for a variety of reasons, but even looking at the survival data and the numbers that we have going in, modeling what that population is predicted to do, it's still showing a pretty substantial increase. And we zoom in on 2020. That's where we start to get a little interested, because that's where we start to see the population, we think, around 200 individuals.
All right, good. And that bar's moving in the right direction. The line is heading up, which is what we wanted. So again, thank you, Aaron, and thanks, folks, for your questions. Keep them coming. We are going to move on to, I think, the hot topic, which is elk hunting in Missouri. So, all right, Aaron, let's get to the good stuff that many folks are talking about, elk hunting. What do we need to know?
So back in 2013, the Conservation Commission established 3 benchmarks that would start serious conversations about an elk hunt in Missouri. And those 3 benchmarks, as I kind of alluded to on the previous slide, a population around 200 elk, 10% or greater population growth annually, and then a bull to cow ratio of 1 bull for every 4 cows or greater. Even with last year's slow growth rate, averaged across, we're still meeting those last 2. We're just looking for the population to get to 200 individuals. But I will say, keep in mind that just because we reach all 3 of those, it's not like we flip a light switch and start hunting them. We want to make it right by this population and don't jump the gun, so to speak.
Right. Okay, so to review, our goal is 200 elk. Our numbers from June, so about 173, 75 elk. Rough count, not committing here, but rough count of calves. We usually have at least several dozen calves.
So I've seen 20 to 25 calves so far this year. So
again, right there.
Things are looking positive, but always got that sense of caution just in case.
Okay, some more questions as we get into that. Again, when will hunting begin? We're going to cover that. Somebody wants to know, what's the average weight of a bull elk? Because these critters are a lot bigger than deer, which we're used to seeing.
That is correct. So, probably an average whitetail buck here in Missouri is 200 pounds. If you get a really big one, it might start hitting near 250. 200 to 250 pounds is the size of a calf in this time of year with the next month or 2 for an elk. So a mature bull elk can weigh anywhere between 700 and 800 pounds here in Missouri. So that they are anatomically, they look the same as deer. They're just much bigger.
Right, much so. You were saying an elk calf this time of year is about the size of a mature whitetail.
It can be, yeah. It's a really healthy calf.
Okay. I don't know if someone's asking the largest elk score for Iraq, and I suggest going on Google and searching, because we don't have any official elk scores in Missouri because we haven't had any hunting in modern history. So we'll be getting to that. So thanks for that. Elk hunting, you were saying those are the 3 benchmarks we're looking to hit. The regulation process started in 2013. And then where did we go from there?
Yeah, so this process really did start in 2013 with the commission setting those benchmarks. We've been working internally to try to think of all of the different parts and pieces that come into this. It is a cool and unique opportunity. This is the first time in probably 4 or 5 decades that the department has brought about an entirely new hunt for a new species. So it is really cool and unique in that regard. Back in July of 2018, we went before the commission to kind of give them an update of where we were and to line out that roadmap for getting from there to an actual hunt. Back in December of 2018, we held 3 open houses, as well as an online comment period so that we could truly solicit comments and input from Missourians on how they wanted elk hunting to look like in Missouri.
Okay, so we put the process in place. We got a number of opportunities to get a whole bunch of public comment back. I think we got thousands and thousands of comments. We held meetings kind of down in that area. Also social considerations. When we talk elk hunting, what do we mean with that?
Yeah, so we want to maximize opportunity, but we have to keep in mind that not everyone is going to get to pursue an elk in Missouri. It's unfortunate, but it is the reality. We have 1.2 to 1.4 million deer in Missouri. We can provide an opportunity for any Missourian who wishes to pursue it to do so. Right now, we're talking about a population goal of 400 to 500 elk. It's going to be a very limited opportunity. But as Lauren was talking earlier, we also have that tourism and the wildlife viewing side of things. And that really is an important thing for both people who would like to hunt them, but also people who don't want to hunt them. That wildlife viewing is incredibly important, and that's where we can really provide the most opportunity for Missourians to interact and see this species here in Missouri.
Right, so it's not just about hunting. A big part of it is it's like 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 Missourians state that they enjoy watching wildlife. So it's also just for the experience, Lauren, as you said, of having them on the landscape and reintroducing a once native species.
Right.
Okay, so this is background. Where are we going to be able to hunt these? What's the hunting zone? Let's check that out.
Yeah, so when the hunting zone will include the entirety of Carter, Shannon, and Reynolds counties. They're in the Ozarks of Missouri.
So the check marks in the boxes down in the Ozarks, that crosshatch is the zone.
Correct. And then within that zone, Peck Ranch is about 24,000 acres. The center portion of that is about 12,000 acres.
Mm-hmm.
That refuge portion of Peck Ranch would be closed to hunting. Part of the reason for that is looking at some of it is the wildlife viewing opportunity. So between proposed hunting dates for elk in Missouri, along with managed deer hunts and the November firearm season, we'd actually be closing the driving portion or the refuge portion of Peck Ranch to the public for more than a month during prime viewing opportunities. We also know from locations that our elk are actually well distributed on the landscape, even though there are certainly elk that are in Peck Ranch or on Peck Ranch in the refuge portion. A large number of our bulls are outside of that area during the time that we were proposing for the hunts.
Okay, so the 3 counties, to keep it simple, really, we're doing county borders for the hunting area for the general elk permits, and it excludes the little yellow greenish dot, which is the refuge area.
That is
All
correct.
right, so folks, that's where elk hunting will be allowed. And let's get to what are some general points for now we're going to have a general elk permit, which we're going to talk about now, and then we're giving landowners a special opportunity, the landowners in that area. We'll talk about that next. So for the general permits.
Yeah, so for the general permits, you spoke and we listened. Missourians wanted it to be available for Missouri residents only, given that it will be such a limited opportunity. So if you're Missouri resident only, you must be 11 years old or older in order to apply. You will need to have hunter education certification or be born before January 1st, 1967. Also, along with that, the apprentice hunter authorization will not substitute for hunter education. Permits would be allocated by a true random lottery, so everybody has the same opportunity every year that applies. There would be a $10 application to apply. If you are one of those lucky recipients, the permit would cost $50. You'd be limited to 1 application per person per year. No group applications would be allowed. And if you are drawn for a permit, not if you harvest, but if you are drawn for a permit in the general elk permits, you would have a 10-year sit-out period, and that's just to try to even the playing field and provide those who have not been drawn an opportunity to draw.
Okay, so that's all of that. Someone is asking, so if you don't get a tag, will we be giving, and I think you've addressed this, will we be using a preference point system as they do out west, or any kind of weighted system?
We will not. And the honest explanation for that is, if with a preference point system, if you have a reasonable draw, so 1 and 2, 1 and 5, preference points work great. They limit the really lucky person to a draw every year. We're probably looking at really, really poor draws. And if we had preference points, it might require people hundreds or thousands of points to draw, and you can only apply once per year. So essentially, by having a preference point system, you would eliminate those who weren't eligible to apply or didn't apply in the first year from ever getting a permit, until everyone who applied that first year no longer applied.
Okay, and one of the magic questions, Randy and a lot of people want to know, we haven't determined it formally, but anticipating how many tags will we be giving out this first go around?
It's likely to be, it's almost certainly less than 10. Realistically, I think it'll probably be closer to 5 once we have a season.
So it'll be, I really a handful. And again, if we weren't clear, and we'll re-clarify, it's for bull elk only.
Correct. Yeah, so it's antlered animals only.
Okay, so these are the points for the general elk hunting permits. Let's talk a little bit about landowners. We have hundreds of landowners in that area. They've really been supportive. They're working their lands, private lands, to develop habitat for elk and other wildlife. So they've kind of invested in this, and this is one of those examples where we want to recognize that investment.
We have more than 80 cooperating landowners within the zone, and so this is basically an opportunity or a way to say thank you for that. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Within that, the purple boundary that's there on the right side, that is the landowner boundary. So we looked at elk locations. That's that green polygon. This is where most of our bull locations during the hunting season are concentrated, but we realize we have they're scattered outside of it. So within that purple boundary, there's about 350 qualifying properties. In order to qualify on this, it's still for resident landowners only. Non-resident landowners are not eligible. At least one permit out of however many are dedicated for a quota would go to a landowner.
So every year that we're planning, we're able to issue permits. At least one of those available permits will be dedicated to landowners only.
Correct. And as the permit quota increases and changes through time, likely this will also change through time. Similar to landowner permits currently, or landowner privileges, those permits for deer and turkey are also restricted to your own property and are non-transferable. This elk landowner permit would be the same. So it would be restricted to the landowner's property, and they would not be able to transfer it to someone else. Have 20 or more acres to qualify, so that's something new that is going in place for 2020 for landowners here. For deer and turkey, doesn't apply for small game, but for deer, turkey, and elk, 20 acres or more to qualify for those landowner opportunities. And your land would have to be, and all 20 acres or more would have to be from within the specified boundary. For the landowner permit, there would not be an application fee for the landowner permit.
Right. So if the landowner wants to apply for the landowner permit, they don't have to throw down the $10, but if they want to apply for the general permit, they do throw down the $10.
That is correct.
Okay.
If a landowner is drawn for the landowner permit, they would still have the $50 permit fee. For landowners that are drawn for a landowner permit, there would be no sit-out period for them to reapply for the landowner permit. If a landowner is drawn for a general permit, they still have the same sit-out period of 10 years as anyone else who's drawn for the general permit. Mm-hmm. A landowner would also be allowed to apply for the general permit and the landowner permit once each year, but they can only be awarded one permit a year.
All right, folks, we're throwing a lot of information out. No fears. All of this information is everything you need to know. We'll be sharing that again after the first of the year and all of that. So let's look at timing. And before we do that, we have a question, and let's hear from Lauren. Talking about elk hunting, somebody asked about shed hunting, where folks want to go and hunt for antlers. So generally in the state of Missouri, it's legal to hunt for deer sheds. It would include elk sheds on public land. You can collect those. And how's that work for this situation, Lauren?
Correct. So you can go out shed hunting for elk sheds. The main caveat to know is if you find a skull with antlers attached, that you do need to contact your conservation agent to give authorization for you to possess that. But outside of that, you can collect sheds.
One exception, and so always, if you're on public land, always make sure that it is legal to collect sheds on that particular property. The big exception for elk, National Park Service property, so the Ozark National Scenic Riverways, it is illegal to collect sheds or skulls on that property. So
Not federal property. You can't, that's on
Park Service. Forest Service is legal. And so on Park Service, if you find, do not collect deer or elk sheds or skulls. That is illegal.
Okay, so we are going long. Great questions. Let's get to the rest of the good stuff. Hunt timing. When's it going to happen?
Yeah. So, point to start. We're issuing, individual permits, but we're saying that we're going to have two different portions. We have an archery portion and a firearm portion. That same one permit is valid for both portions for the taking of a total of one animal. So,
okay, and thank you. We had a question. So if drawing the permit, can it be used for both archery and firearms? The answer is yes.
Yes. If you fill it during the archery portion, which was earlier,
One permit.
that cancels your tag. You would not then be able to participate in the firearm portion. We picked the timing, especially for the archery season. We realized that people want the opportunity to interact with these animals. It's really cool to hear an elk bugle in the woods. We also have a goal of continuing to increase or grow the population. So we want to make sure that timing is just after the peak of breeding season so that we can meet those, population growth goals, but still provide that cool opportunity to interact with elk during that time of year. We have elk bugling in Missouri in the middle of September, sometimes even into early December. So there is a really cool opportunity to do that.
Right, so if we look at, again, this bar graph, the first arrow on the left is archery season, which you can see is scheduled really to be after the prime part of the rut and breeding season. And then the firearm season runs later. And why is that timed like that?
So yeah, the firearm portion is set to be in early December. And that is set that way for two reasons. One, we have a lot of deer hunters in Missouri who are really, really passionate about deer hunting. We don't want to take away your opportunity to deer hunt or put elk in the middle of it. So we moved it outside of November. Also, we know from GPS locations that our bull elk are really well distributed on the landscape in December. So even though the refuge portion is closed, there's really good distribution of the male antlered animals, which are the only ones that would be illegal at both of these hunt times.
So that time of year, there's a wider variety of locations, potentially harvestable elk. Okay, so additional details we want folks to know.
Yeah, so the methods of take for elk are going to be the same as for deer. We talked about how clearly an elk is not a deer and that it is significantly larger. Have the ability to decide whether or not this is a caliber that's big enough to use or not. We're also going to have the opportunity to talk with those who are drawn for these permits and make sure that they understand this isn't your 200-pound buck, this is your 800-pound bull.
That's great, because we had a question for rifle season for elk. Is there a certain caliber that needs to be used? You said it's really hunter preference, but we will be meeting with every hunter who gets selected this inaugural season, answering all the questions and really doing an orientation for that, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Another quick question we have, will there be any guided hunts allowed?
So
will there be a handicap hunt?
at this time, no.
Okay. So if Robert wants to know, if you're not chosen, do you get your application fee back?
No.
Okay, we got some no's. When elk hunting starts, can folks use, say, a horse, a mule, an ATV? These are large animals. You can't just put it on your back and haul it out. So what's that special
You can put it on your back and haul it out just in pieces.
Right, a haunch at a time.
Yes. Yes, an elk will take a lot more work to get out of the woods. ATVs, again, if you're hunting public land, know the rules and regulations for that area. ATVs are not legal for use on MDC areas. So part of it's going to depend on where you are.
Right. So if you can't off-road on an MDC area, which you can't any time of year, you won't get any special permission to use an ATV to transport an elk out. So
That is correct.
again, when we get to that point, we'll talk with folks and we'll need to figure that out. let's see, a few more things as we get here. So the additional details, method same as deer. The take for a bull elk, what's the minimum?
So as long as the animal has one antler that is at least 6 inches long, it is legal. So that covers basically everything from a yearling to the oldest age adult. So any antlered male or any antlered elk is legal. Also, so similar to something that we just added for the youth deer and turkey season, a hunter certified unlicensed adult may quote, assist with the hunt. This will also now include elk, even though we don't have a youth portion if a youth is selected. So in this case, it'll be until they're about to turn 16, they would be able to have an adult assist them. That does not mean that the adult may pull the trigger or release the arrow.
Right.
They may just spot and call.
Okay, and then tying in with that, a couple things. Thank you, Steve. You were asking as far as the point restriction. So Steve, again, we just covered that, at least one antler of at least 6 inches in length. And then Ben was asking, can those who don't have a permit someone on their hunts? Because again, field dressing, hauling, this is a lot of work.
Absolutely. So you may accompany, you just may not assist in the take. So
and does that include helping to say use a call to draw in a bull or any of that?
So when if you do not have an elk hunting license and you are going along with someone who does, you may go out with them in the woods, you may talk with them, you may walk with them, you may not spot, you may not call, you may not pull the trigger. You may help them get the elk out of the woods once it is down. That is the same thing that is currently in place for deer and turkey. We just have far more permits for those two seasons.
So along with methods of take, it's pretty much the similar rules.
Correct.
Daniel wants to know, are the permits valid only for public properties, or can a hunter get access for private landowners to hunt their property under a general tag?
Absolutely. So if you have a general tag, you may hunt wherever you have permission, so both public and private land, but again, make sure on private land, have permission from that landowner.
Folks, that's a lot of information. We have finally, I think, our key timeline points we want to make sure folks know. Starting this summer, we had a public comment period. Our commission actually is meeting this Friday. And what's going on?
So on Friday, the commission will basically pass the final orders of rulemaking. So what was presented to the commission back in June will be brought back up. They'll make any changes that are necessary after the public comment period is closed. And then those will go into code. And we'll see what that ends up looking like. When we look forward to early 2020, as I mentioned earlier, we're doing cow-calf counts now. We also have our annual winter survey. Once we get that information in hand, we will take that, review it, remodel where we are for the population, and then with that, we'll make our recommendation back to the commission sometime probably between January and April. We'll make our recommendation for what that permit quota will be. That could be 0, it could be 5. We don't know until we get there. So
okay, Robert wanted to know at some point, do you think we'll have cow tags in the future?
We are likely to have cow tags somewhere in the future. Again, right now we have the goal of growing that population. Once we get to a higher number, we will start looking at cow tags at that time.
All right, so key timeline. Again, takeaway from this, the big decisions on an inaugural season are going to be happening in the early new year, kind of within that first quarter, January, you said, through April. Once we determine that, we'll finalize everything. We'll get the word out to folks in the spring for a fall hunt. So that timing period, the application period, folks will have information in advance and plenty of time to apply before you even have the hunt, right?
That is correct. Whether we have the hunt this year, next year, or some year in the future, once we have a quota established, the public will be made readily aware of when those application timelines are and when the hunt is. And we want to make sure that Public is aware once we do have a quota established.
Okay, so we answered that. Monty wants to know, what's the largest antlered elk in Missouri? That's kind of tough to know because, as we said at the beginning, elk were extirpated or really eliminated from the state in the 1880s.
Correct.
So don't really have a lot of current information. There's been no regulated or approved elk hunting public land in the state since then. So we don't know, Monty, but we'll keep looking into that.
We do have some very nice elk in Missouri that are.
They got some big bulls down there.
Very, very well.
Okay, Daniel wants to know, can landowners be allowed to charge for a hunter to use their property for elk hunting? And I think the answer to that is you need to talk it to the landowner, because that is a private transaction as far as allowing them on the property.
Correct. So the landowner can allow you on there free of charge. The landowner may ask to charge you for access or a trespass fee. That is entirely between the hunter and the landowner.
Okay, and then again, somebody wanted to know, will the boundary, kind of the elk zone, be expanded? We already said that's a good area. It's the only area in the state that's good for them. So we're really looking to keep elk within that general area of the Ozarks, including our restoration zone. All right, folks, we are wrapping up here. So a final question, maybe if we get one. I think we covered just about all the information we have. So our timing is about done. So let's take this opportunity to thank our guest experts, Lauren and Aaron. Thank you so much. Great information. Great visiting with you.
Of course.
And that's the time we have, folks. So again, thank you for sharing your questions. Hope we provided a lot of information. Thanks again, Lauren and Aaron. Really exciting time. And you can get more information on elk and other conservation topics from us online at mdc.mo.gov. And also, we will be posting this webcast in addition to other wild webcasts we've done. Give us about a day for this one, folks. But that will be on mdc.mo.gov/MDC-wild-webcasts, or just go to our main website and in the search box, plug in Wild Webcasts. That's about it. Thanks again, Lauren and Aaron. Thank you, folks, for joining us. Get outside and discover nature.